Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry. I'm here with Mike and Mike, of course. We're going to talk about hiring sales professionals. One of the challenges any leader faces is hiring the right team, and a sales team is only as good as each member. Mike and Mike, let's just start off with talking about how do you recruit?
Well, I tell you, it depends on the client, and it really depends on what the objectives are, what the sales strategy is, the type of product that we're supporting. And it really, from that, really determines what type of salesperson do you need to add to the team. What we use is our personal network. Sometimes we'll rely on traditional job postings. But one of the things we always do is we stay directly engaged in the recruiting process. And so we don't rely on recruiters or HR people to try and convey the story of what we need in a salesperson. The other way that we recruit is through Arizona State University. We are located in an ASU campus. We're headquartered in Scottsdale, and we have access to the WP Carey business program. And what we found over the years is that there's a tremendous resource there, both from the recruiting staff at ASU, but also the students that are very interested in doing internships and engaging early to get a head start on their careers. And so we've formed a tight alliance with ASU, and we've attended the career events. And it's given us an opportunity to really meet people that are considering a career in sales. In the academic environment, you really don't get exposed to what does a sales career look like. And I think I was in the same boat. I was a marketing major back in the day, and there wasn't an option to study sales. It was more about get a marketing degree and then find yourself in sales. But I knew I wanted to be in a sales role. I hear that a lot from people that I meet at these recruiting events. They're considering a career in sales, but they're not really supported in the academic adventure to understand what that really means. I have a lot of really good conversations with students that are thinking about a career in sales, but they don't know what it means. And I think that's a way to describe what would a long-term career in enterprise sales look like and what would they need to do to prepare for that. So that's when we introduce the concepts of what we consider to be professional sales, what skills they would want to attain, what experience they'd want to gather before they start pursuing a career in sales. And so it's a great way for us to really find people that are early career.
That ASU intern program does sound interesting. I look back to when I was in college, and one of my undergrad degrees is in marketing. And that's an easy transition, you would think, from marketing degree to sales. And I can't think of anybody on campus talking about what a sales career would be like. That's an interesting way to look at it. Now, when you are talking to people, whether it's at ASU or you're recruiting elsewhere, what do you look for?
There are three main things that we look for as we start having those conversations with people who are interested in joining us or people that we might be interested in adding to the team. The first thing we look for is attitude. Important to have a positive attitude, one where you've got this willingness to learn, not take yourself too seriously, understand that, as you said in the intro, that sales is a thinking process, and we're not looking for people who are going to come in with this approach of, I'm just going to do what I'm told. You've got to have this can-do attitude that you can apply to the business. The second item that we look for is initiative. This ties into that first piece. It's not about being told what to do. It's about going out and finding new opportunities that align with things that you're interested in, and then being able to convey that out to others. So attitude, initiative, and the third piece is intelligence. Do they have the right business acumen? Can they retain information? Are they able to deliver that information back out? Are they able to take the information that's gathered and put together their own thoughts around it? So we look at attitude, initiative, and intelligence. I'm sure Mike has some other ideas to build upon there.
The first question I would have about that is, how do you determine somebody's, initiative or intelligence in an interview process? I mean, if they show up on time, okay, great. They've shown some initiative in being able to find your building and show up. And you also see lack of initiative. Just recently, we had a guy show up for an interview, and he was running about 10 minutes late, and he gave us the customary text saying, hey, I'm on my way. I hit traffic. I'm running a little bit late. And then he shows up in our office with a Dutch Bros frozen coffee in his hand and was just ready to get started. And immediately that sent the message to us that said, wow, it was more important to stop and get a coffee than it was to be on time for the interview. So we're thinking, great, he had initiative to go get a coffee to satisfy his thirst, but maybe having the intelligence to know that showing up on time may have been the better move. Little things like that are nuancy. But I think one of the things to really kind of highlight how we apply this in real life, because trying to ascertain these things in an interview setting is not the easiest thing to do. And for us in the recruiting process, and obviously we recruit different types of people for different roles. And sometimes it's a senior role where it's a referral and things like that. To go back to the ASU example, we actually have a process that we follow that walks people through a very sort of calculated way to assess all of these three attributes. Because after all, these are things you can't train people. These are things that if they bring them into the table, you found a person you can really mold and work with and mentor. And these are three things that you'll just never be able to train or motivate. Using the ASU process as an example, what we do there is we initially meet people at the recruiting events, and we have a lot of good conversations with really bright people. And we collect resumes and we start to then look at what is the general makeup of this person. And just through a brief conversation that you have with somebody at one of these events and understanding that they're talking to lots of recruiters and things like that, we get that initial impression. And we write little notes on the resume so that we remember who's who. We probably talk to about 100 people at those events. And then from there, we go back to the office and we say, okay, let's go through the notes that we made. Let's go through the content in the resumes, the quality of the resumes. Let's see how much energy they really put into this recruiting fair, or did they just show up with something that they scribbled out very quickly? And from there, we really start to assess these three things. The first thing we do is a telephone interview. And we determine how articulate they are in addressing some of the questions. And we don't throw difficult questions at them, but we just want to see how conversational they are on the phone and how quick they think on their feet and things like that, and get a general understanding of what they're all about. And from that process, we probably very quickly eliminate half of the resumes just based on that initial impression, because we figure in sales, you're making initial impressions all the time. From there, we take the next step, which is come in for a personal interview. And that gives them an opportunity to see things like the Dutch Bros example. Are they showing up with an iced coffee, or are they showing up early and prepared and dressed appropriately and things like that? And so you kind of get a sense for how seriously they're taking the opportunity, and then how prepared are they to have that next step conversation. And that's all fine and good. But I think what really separates then the good candidates from the ones that we end up hiring are the next steps. And that's when we start to look at the true initiative, intelligence, and attitude that the person has about how serious they are with the opportunity. And what we do is we essentially give them an assignment. After the in-person meeting, what we ask them to do is a presentation. We invite them to, and we give them pretty easy topics. So usually we tie the topic to our business, and we ask them to do a little bit of research and put together a very simple presentation. And we ask them to do that, and then we invite them to come back and present that to both us and then usually one of who will become one of their peers. And in that process, you find that you very quickly lose the people that don't have true initiative and that really don't take the opportunity seriously. So we go from maybe 100 down to 50. We interview maybe a dozen. And then from there, you get about 5 that are willing to take that next step. And what we found is that the 5 that actually come in and deliver the presentation, take the initiative, and execute on that mission, irrespective of what they do in their presentation from a content perspective, just those elements tell us, okay, this is a person that's ready to start learning about the sales profession. And so that's just one way that we apply this to try and go from 100 well-intentioned people at a recruiting fair to let's join the team.
And Mike went into a lot of detail there about the process and the steps that we follow through. But one of the great indicators that someone will provide on related to initiative and intelligence are the questions that they ask. So as we go through this process and we're interviewing, we look at an interview both in us interviewing the person, but expect that the person is going to interview us as well. Their questions demonstrate how much research they did into the organization that they're talking to. So how much do they know about Catalyst Sales as a business? What thought process is going through their heads around the product that they might be selling, or the approach that we take, or expectations that they have around working with a new employer. Again, that interview is both for us and for the person on the other end. And those questions that they ask really help us understand both that initiative component and the intelligence side of things.
That's a great point, because there's nothing worse than coming into an interview and the person doesn't even know what the company does or who we are. And one candidate that I can think of recently that really stood out for us was a person that really understood not just us as Catalyst, but also looked at our backgrounds. I mean, our profiles are on LinkedIn and we have a pretty elaborate background as far as the detail we provide there. And it's really interesting when somebody really goes to that next level. And in my case, it was about some previous posts that I had contributed to LinkedIn. So I've written several articles and things like that. And there was one in particular that resonated with this person we interviewed. And just the fact that they took the time to read that article and then ask me questions even just about that, not just about the job, but really trying to understand who I am as a professional, who Mike is as a professional, to see if there's a good fit there. Because what a lot of people are looking for is leadership and mentorship that will help them advance their careers. And so when you have those kinds of conversations, it really gets you off to a great start.
With all the hiring that you've done and the sales people that you have worked with, from your view, what makes a good salesperson?
When I think of a good salesperson, I think of the three characteristics that we talked about before: attitude, initiative, intelligence. Do they begin with the end in mind? Do they have a plan? Are they starting from the perspective of, I want to understand what's important to the customer so that I can put my solution in the context of what's important to the customer? If the salesperson takes a service-oriented approach to doing their job, I think they're more successful long-term than if they take the approach of, hey, I can just go ahead and sell ice cubes to an Eskimo because I've got this great way to deliver information. So what I look for is, how well do they present themselves that they're in a role where they're helping others rather than just helping themselves.
I think we see that too with different people that we hire. And, in many cases, salespeople will come from backgrounds where they were plugged into an existing team or an existing process that has a proven track record that, is understood well. And if you do the certain things consistently, this is the result you can expect. And what we do is really different, because we're taking companies that haven't done that yet. They haven't cracked the code, so to speak, and they're trying to make those initial sales right out of the gate. And it's always interesting to see people, and we have people like this on our team today that are making that transition from being part of a team that's got a proven track record methodology to building something from zero. And one of the key evolution points that I see in a person's learning, and it's always exciting to see this happen, is that, like Mike said, they go from that point of worrying about them being able to achieve their sales goals and make quota and generate commission and all of that, which are things that, you want salespeople to be inspired to do. That's why you align comp plans the way you do. But the more important thing is that the light bulb goes off and they realize that as soon as I start caring about how I'm helping people and how I add value to a process is when they really start to hit their stride. And that's just part of the evolution of realizing that really the only way you're going to succeed is if you understand what you do and how it adds value and why a customer or a prospect would see you as a subject matter expert or somebody that will help them solve their problems.
We've talked about hiring sales professionals, but let's turn the chair around. What expectations should a salesperson have in the person that is hiring them?
That's actually a really good question. And it's been a long time since I've interviewed to be a salesperson, but I've also, being on the receiving end of that, have really appreciated the thoughtfulness of some of the things that people are looking for when they are interviewing for a sales position. And the things that they're concerned about. If you have a person that only asks questions about what's my quota going to be, how much will I make, how successful is the top person, and I see a lot of the stereotypical sales behaviors, that tells me that they're interviewing for their next job and maybe it's not a real career or a real growth step. What I appreciate about people is when they start asking questions about, how are you going to help me learn? How can I improve where I am today? I've been in a role for the last 5 years. I thought I had 5 years of experience, but really I had about 2 years of experience times 2. What are the things that I would learn at Catalyst Sale in my career progression? And I always appreciate those questions because I think today there are larger companies you can go work for where, particularly in a sales role, you can start out in what they call an SDR role where you do time there, essentially doing the qualification part of the sales process. Then if you do that well, then you become an account executive and now all of a sudden you're a closer. You really don't get the end-to-end experience of managing an entire sales process. And a lot of people that are sort of in those ruts as sales professionals where they're not really learning and growing, I always look for that in their questions to see if they're wanting to improve their craft. And we look at professional sales as a professional craft, just like any other professional discipline, that you definitely learn this from people that have been there and that have the experience.
I would summarize a lot of what Mike had said with one word, which is commitment. As a sales professional going into any organization, there should be a level of commitment that you see from the person who's interviewing you or the person who is going to be leading you, commitment to your overall success. And that's demonstrated by how engaged they are. If I'm interviewing for a new sales role, probably not excited about going into some meat market where I'm going to be going through and asking the same questions over and over again of the same people. There's a script that I've got to go through. I'm more interested in an environment where I've got an opportunity to be creative and I've got an opportunity to be able to learn. So from my standpoint, when I think about expectations that a sales professional should have, is they should know that they're working with people who are committed to their success. And that can be demonstrated by education opportunities that they provide, learning opportunities that they provide, and chances to try new things.
I totally agree with that. And the other thing that I think we like to convey to the team is that we're right there with them. When we're cracking the code, as I said earlier, we're not just hiring them and then turning them loose with a bunch of tools and saying, well, if you're any good, you'll work out. A lot of companies use mass hiring processes where they'll say, we'll bring in a cohort of 40 salespeople and run them through our process. And then, if 5 people make it out of the 40, great. We're ahead of the game. And I think one of the things that we're committed to is not wasting our time or a sales professional's time. We don't want to hire somebody to run them through a process and see if they survive or not. So back to your sort of original question, one of the things I was just thinking about, Jody, was what would some red flags be that might be present in an interview if I was a salesperson and the hiring manager, first of all, if they weren't the direct hiring manager, the sales manager, and it was an HR person, they probably won't be able to answer a lot of your questions from a sales perspective. But even when I reflect back on my early days in interviewing with sales leaders, they would say things to me like, your income is uncapped. We have an uncapped commission plan and you'll make as much as you're worth. And just things like that to sort of paint the picture that you're going to make as much money as you want. And that's not realistic. And so what I would look for, particularly in today's hiring arena in the sales area, is does that sales leader really know what they're talking about? Are they credible? Can they give you examples of what a reasonable attainment would look like? Do they have the data to back up the promises that they're making you in the interview? And one of the things I hear really consistently with people that we interview, and the reason I think we have a really high acceptance rate with people that we do engage with, is because they feel like we're giving them the total story. We're not overselling them on the job. We set real expectations. We provide the data that shows them what that path looks like. And then we help them attain those goals. A lot of places, I think, unfortunately, a lot of companies overcommit to what the potential is. And as salespeople that are very monetarily focused or what have you, buy into that vision. And then 3 months later, in fact, this just happened to me this week where we had a gentleman we extended an offer to, and he elected to go with another company that just happens to be in the same building that we're in. 90 days into the journey, he emailed me and he said, the opening line to the email was, I made a huge mistake. And I read on and exactly what he highlighted was, I was oversold on the position. My expectations are completely different from what were set. Do you still have an opening on your team? And I've heard that multiple times where people hear the story and they get oversold. And so I think that would be the one thing I would really keep an eye on is, can they back up the data and they know what they're talking about and not just promising the moon? Because if you find yourself in that position, then it tends to be an uphill battle from there.
So we've been talking about hiring sales professionals, but let's talk about sales. Mike, what is sales?
In my mind, when I think of sales, I think of connecting people with things that are important or things that are valuable to them. That could either be a service that solves a problem, a product that solves a problem, a capability that solves a problem. But for me, sales is about networking, connection, and increasing the speed to which those connections take place.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons we named the company Catalyst Sale.
Thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast. You can find out more about Catalyst Sale at catalystsale.com or follow us on Twitter at Catalyst Sale. If you enjoy what you're hearing, share this podcast with your colleagues. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or Google Play. Thank you for listening to Catalyst Sale.